Greetings, welcome back to Game Design. This is lesson 18, Velocity, and in this lesson we're going to learn how to do things the easy way, so to speak. A lot of times you'll learn how to do stuff the hard way first and then find a better way to do. But again, it is important to understand that this does technically work differently, right? It is a replacement for the counter pattern, but it does work differently than this, right? So there's some key points, point out in the video, I'll talk about it as well. But it essentially does the counter patterns. If you do velocity x equals 1, it's pretty much the same as saying sprite.x equals sprite x plus 1, right? That is the kind of the gist of what we're going here. But let's go and jump into this lesson. It's fairly straightforward. But we'll also talk about how you can use it to improve or not do it. If you go back to the Pong that I was working on, if you watch the other videos about the Pong, right? When I go to improve Pong, I'm going to still use the counter pattern for the paddles, right? I believe it's easier in this case to keep it that way, but the ball I'm going to upgrade to velocity. So let's look at how this works. So we'll jump right into the skill building and we'll look at this code. Right, one of the ways you did the stuff was doing the counter pattern x equals x plus 1. Now here's the first major difference, right? I have the access to the velocity, right? And call it fish. So this is sprite fish, velocity x equals 1. Now notice I put this outside of the draw function, and yet it's still moving. Essentially, and if you watch the video that's going to come up next, what happens is it takes this and sticks it right at the end here, which means it's always going, right? It's not going to stop, right? And as we'll see in a few of these lessons, levels, it's gonna, if you start something doing this way, it's gonna keep on going, because what it does is it adds this to the end. It doesn't just put it where you have it, right? It adds it so it's always there, right? So that is an important thing, right? And then what number this is depend on whatever you change this to, right? So there's ways to stop it. We'll talk about that. But it's important to understand what's going on, right? It's essentially adding this at the bottom. No if statement around it. It's at the bottom. It's always running. Once you start velocity, it's always running. Now you might have +0. It's still running. It's just not doing anything. So we'll talk about this as we go through. So go ahead, pause, watch the video if you haven't already. Then once you watch the video, come on back and we'll jump into level 3. All right, on level 3, we're going to go ahead and work with this velocity x again, right? So let's run this. Feather doesn't do anything. All this one is now we're going to do the y, all right? So we did the, oops, I did not copy enough of that. We did the x, we can do the y, right? And all you got to remember is this is 0, this is 400, so we need to go up to go down, right? We need to go, so +1 equals 1, right? And if we want it to fly up, we do negative, right? So now it's going down. If I do a negative here, it floats up. There's a hot air wind or something blowing it up. So fairly straightforward. We're going to move on to the next one. All right, so level 4, it's going to kind of have us think a little bit more on this one. So in this case, we're just going to do rotation speed, right? So we run this, it doesn't do anything. It has the same concept. Sprite rotation speed, type in sun, and then equals 3. This is essentially saying sun.rotation, and down here, sun.rotation equals sun.rotation plus 3, right? So now it spins, and we can change that whenever we want. Everything so far, x, y, the velocity y, velocity x, speed rotation, they all accomplish the same thing. You run them here, and then it runs it. So you don't need to put it in. You don't need to put it in there to get it to start off. But as we'll see as we go through these lessons, we can make it so it changes. Like we run this, nothing happens. We have the if key went down. Let's change the rotation speed, and it is a wheel. And let's just set it to 3 again. All right. Now, in this case, it is protected by an if statement, so it's not starting at the beginning. But as soon as we hit the spacebar, again, I don't know if you hear me clicking, right? It went down already, right? It's not going to stop. As soon as this code is run, it sticks it again at the bottom. Rotation speed equals rotation length 1. Now, we can do other stuff like this, right? So if I do else, squiggly bracket enter, I can set it to 0. Right? So there's ways to do whatever you want, right? The counter pattern, they just work differently, right? The way you would do this for counter pattern is different than not, right? So I'm actually going to change this to went down. All right, so when I reset and run this, it doesn't rotate, right? Because the spacebar is not down. When I hit the spacebar, it rotates. While it's down, as soon as I let go, it stops, right? Starts, stops. So you would need to do this if that's what you wanted to do. And again, it all depends if you did this with a counter pattern, which is why, as I mentioned in the Pong game, I'm going to go ahead and do this with my Pong. So I have wheel rotation equals wheel dot rotation plus 3. And you can see every time I hit the space bar, it's rotating this because it's still on the old one. All right, so reset and run this. Nothing happens. I hit the space bar. All right, so this code that I just wrote does, right? It does exactly the same thing, right? So again, you just need to realize this only does that plus 3 while the space is down. Oops. So go back to the old code real quick, and there you go. Right, reset and run. It takes this extra. You have to stop it, right? You have to stop it. So depending on what you're trying to do, you need to understand it. And as you're going through the things, it might be like as it goes up to here, and it hits this thing, negative, it goes less than 0, then it goes positive 3, it goes greater than 400, negative 3, and you get something to bounce. So again, you're going to use a lot of if-else statements when you're using velocity in order, because again, once it starts, right, if I just run this line of code, once I start it, right, it's going, right? It's gone. There's nothing I can do in this currently running program to change it from going. So again, I showed you if you did the rotation equals rotation plus 3, it would stop when you let go, whereas this starts it, right? And again, that might be what you want to do, right? You have some kind of object, you want to click a button and it shoots across and you want it to go, and then maybe if it gets to the other side of the screen, then it stops or whatever, right? So again, it depends on what you're trying to do, right? There's not like velocity is necessarily better than the counter pattern or vice versa. It's just what you're trying to do. It can be easier than the counter pattern because you don't have to do all that other pieces. But let's go ahead and move on to the last one. We got 2 more, and then we'll let you get to the practice. Yay me. All right, so level 6. All right, we're going to go one advantage is the if statements. So let's run this, and then, all right, so hopefully you paused it and figured out what it did, but you can look at it. There is one other thing that's interesting about this that you'll have to look at later, is this fish animation. So when it's going right, it uses the right fish animation, and when it goes left, it uses the left fish animation, right? So that's actually turning around as well as changing the velocity, right? So I talked about this before. You use if statements to get it to make it look like it bounces. So if the thing's always going, right? I think that's probably one thing to think about. If the thing's always going, velocity is normally better, right? So if you're thinking about what should I use, if it's like I said, the paddles in Pong, they're not always going, right? They're only going when I press up or down. So the counter pattern to me would work better in that situation. So that's one way to look at it. All right, we got one more to look at, and then you're on to your practice. So again, just remember, kind of velocity just turns on movement. All right, the last one, we run this, it goes down, and it bounces, and then it goes off the screen. So again, using what they just did, we can copy this, paste it, we can, and I'm going to use 20, so less than 20, because apparently the ball must be 40 wide, so that's why they already had 380, so it bounces here and goes back, right? So it bounces here. I'm going to change to 400 for a split second so you can see what happens if you just use 400. as your number, right? So again, you'll see it goes like half off the screen. There we go when it bounces. So that's why we have 380, and that is why I am doing 20. All right, and then I make this positive, reset run, and now it bounces and bounces off both sides. All right, you can go ahead, start the practice, the assessment, the challenge. I'm going to show you one more thing if you want to stick around, but otherwise the lesson's done. This is kind of neat. I can do acceleration, so var acceleration. I probably spelled that wrong. All right, equals 1. Acceleration. And then what we can do is we can make it so it adds acceleration, in this case minus acceleration, and then we can do acceleration equals acceleration plus 1, and that means, well, right now I guess this would be every time it hits. Actually, no, don't put it here. Sorry, I did this before. It's going to accelerate way too fast. Don't put it there. I'm going to put it in here. So this means only if it hits. Now I can also put it here, and it would be when it hits either side. But right now this is only the top, right? So if it's the top, it's going to get faster. So we go down, and we can see this by adding the watcher. Oops, I just want acceleration. You can already kind of see it getting faster and faster. Let me do that. All right, so it's a 5, 6, 7, right? You can start to see it get faster and faster because it's at 5 plus 7 plus 9, right? You can see that the velocity is going up because it's adding or subtracting acceleration every single time, and eventually you get really, really crazy fast. But that's it. I want to show you, again, there's all kinds of options. Because now that you know variables, you know if statements, there's a lot you can do to add as long as you put stuff, right? Variables allow you to track stuff. You're like, how do I do this? Well, you can track, how do I track score? How do I track if something's happened? How do I track if I clicked, right? How do I make something go faster? Variables allow you to do a lot of different things. So get to examples where you can say like, all right, if this button's not pressed, don't do anything. You're tracking something, and then all of a sudden you flip it on, and you can have a statement. So if acceleration equals this, enter this. All right, that's all I have for this lesson. We'll see you next lesson.